shortly. Okay. And a little bit about the BioBlitz plan, just because that was part of it.
I'm going to jump in, and I want to start again because I didn't press that record button.
All righty.
I'm gonna stop recording. Welcome, everyone. My name's Guy Dauncey, and this is our Yellow Point Ecological Society meeting with Carrie-Lyn Robinson on the joy of wetlands. And in the Yellow Point Ecological Society, we work to appreciate, protect, and restore nature. And if you share that passion, please join us at yellowpointecologicalsociety.ca. One of the things we're working on this summer is to produce a handbook for local landowners on the love of nature. And a couple of years ago, we produced a video on For the Love of the Forest. We like that love thing. We're also working to have a project for the love of pedestrians and horse riders and cyclists to get a safe separated trail all along Yellow Point Road from the Chuckwagon right up to the Crowan Gate. And later this July and September, we'll be doing a big project to clear the ivy out of Hema Park. And a couple of months ago, we had an evening meeting on the Coxseiler watershed. So I'm going to stop sharing now and welcome Carrie-Lyn Robinson. And Carrie-Lyn Robinson is bear with me here. In March and April of this year, Carrie-Lyn worked with the Yellow Point Ecological Society to find and map wetlands in the Yellow Point and Cedar area that had not previously been mapped. She's lived in South Nanaimo for a decade and graduated with a Bachelor of Arts double major from Vancouver Island University in 2019. Her geography degree specialized in urban and social sustainability, and her anthropology degree specialized in archaeology. She has received her Advanced Geographic Information Systems Application Diploma. That's a lengthy title. From VIU after completing her Wetland Mapping Project with YES, and she's returning to VIU in the fall to complete her GIS Master's degree. So Carrie, welcome to the evening, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Guy. As Guy said, my name is Carrie Robinson, and I will be talking today about the joy of wetlands. I'm just going to bring up my PowerPoint here.
And there we go. Yeah.
There we go. The joy of wetlands. And this is part of my GIS diploma. This is 1 year, so I am employable as a GIS technician now, and I will be continuing in the fall to do my master's. So I'm going to talk about the overview first. So I'll have a project description, the objectives, the methods that I use to accomplish this, a bit about the Canadian wetland classification, the work that I accomplished, the knowledge and skills I achieved, because it is part of my education, and the deliverables I will be handing over to Yes here shortly. And then a little bit about the BioBlitz planning that I did as a secondary event for Yes. So the project description, Guy and I talked about several different types of projects, and one of them was this wetland mapping. And the reason why I chose the wetland mapping was because there were areas that were just not mapped on any map that I could find. So I wanted to do an accurate mapping of that. The current CVRD's official community plan is 35 years old, so it's a little out of date. And they're developing a new one here. So they're in the process of that right now. So it's kind of important to include wetlands in those. To identify potential areas that are in need of protection, and to read about and learn about the existing regulations for riparian zones and wetlands and what can be done to protect those areas. One thing I did learn about was the minimum on Vancouver Island, a wetland has to be 1/2 hectare in size in order to be protected. So, and as you can see in this previous photo here, this is one area that sort of just grabbed my attention. Now this purple one down here is the actual CVRD's lot plan for all you guys' lots down there. And the wetland is not on there. So this is the one that sort of grabbed my attention and went, why is that not on there? And then this is the actual zoning map, also not on there. It's got that little lake there. It's got the other lake over here, but not that wetland. And I thought that was kind of important. So the objective, as I said, to identify wetlands using visual analysis, both here on the computer and on the ground. The ground truthing part, using GIS computer software, and learning about the classification types, what types of wetlands there are, and how to identify those. The field observations are GPS points, which are down here on this. Here, these are GPS points. Those are actually taken in the field. And recording visual of the flora, all the types of trees and bushes and scrub, everything that's sort of there, right down to the mosses and the lichen, to the fauna, you know, the types of animals that I find there, like this little tree frog here. And I like to record things in photographs, so it helps me to remember things. So many photographs were taken. And then this is one of the wetlands there in Yellow Point right there. So the methods include, just a little more in-depth, was those photographs, like this one here. This is a photograph of, this is called a transect, and it's 1 meter by 1 meter, and it's to record the plant species in there. And as you can see, there's some skunk cabbage and some reeds. And because this was done in March, not so much is growing yet. So it's always good to do this again later in the season. But these things are all recorded this way so that people can continue on and follow that. And then here, I also dug holes anywhere from 30 to 50 centimeters deep, so I could record the different types of soil layers, because that's important when you're doing wetlands. And then your GPS waypoints, like I already talked about here, I actually created these. This particular feature, I was able to canoe around and recorded these points. Most of them I did walk through tons of Salal and, you know, went for quite the hike, but this one was just a little too big and I didn't have permission to go on everyone's land. So I just followed the feature in the water. Some land I did have Richard Hills to go on his. So, and then by doing this, this is how I created these features in GIS. I took these GPS points and I created polygons. What are polygons? So there's a one behind here, that's a green one. And then this purple one in the front is done using a manual process through GIS software. And you can see it's not quite as accurate, but if you have 100 wetlands to do, this may be all they do. So if you go onto a site and you see that the lake doesn't quite fit, they probably used a method like this. But for me, I did them by hand. So I followed and created these lines for each one of these wetlands that I found and made polygons like this. So that's the wetland. And then you can see how much more accurate this is it, but I've made it a little more transparent and you can see how much more accurate that is. And it follows quite nicely. And that's what GIS does, or the person who uses GIS does. So about the Canadian wetland classifications. So we have two sort of broad categories. They can be mineral wetlands or organic wetlands. And those are, the mineral ones have shallow open water, marshes and swamps, which is most of what we have here on Vancouver Island. You find more of the bogs and fens in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan, but I'm sure the bogs and fens exist here too, but we seem to have more of these because Vancouver Island's very close to the surface. So bogs, to describe bogs, they're very nutrient poor and they must have 40 centimeters of peat, which is why I didn't find any of these in the ones that I did. The strongly acidic, so this is why pH was recorded for so many of them, because then you can determine what the pH level is and whether they fall into this category or not. And the sphagnum mosses, I didn't find any of those. And the black spruce is the main kind of sort of tree that you'll find there. For bogs particularly, they're often raised above the surrounding landscape, but yet they're still got that wetness to them. So the fens are very similar to bogs. They're nutrient poor. They've got the peat, they got the mosses and grasses, which we do have mosses, but they're different types of mosses. These can be completely void of trees or shrubs. I'm assuming that has partially to do with the acidity in the soil. And they do also have the tamarack. So the next three, the fens also have the slow drainage. The next three are the three that we mostly have here on Vancouver Island, or the mostly that I found on Vancouver Island so far. So the marshes, they have an adequate amount of nutrients. They're not high nutrient, but they have an adequate amount for different kinds of types of plants. And they have mineralized soils, which is important because with that high acidity, stuff doesn't grow as well. These marshes are regularly flooded. They have standing or slow moving water. And you see mostly reeds and rushes. And this is actually one of the wetlands that I did map here. This is a picture of it right here. These ones are of Alberta. So you see the reeds and rushes in there. And then you have they're void of woody vegetation in the actual wetland itself, maybe in the surrounding area a little bit, but in the wetland itself, there's none. So swamps, similar, but they're much more nutrient rich. They have that a combination of mineral and organics. They have seasonal water flows, so the water flow can be quite different depending on what type of year, which is why it's important to track these wetlands more than once a year, not just map them once. You have subsurface flows, right? So below the surface, you can, even though you may not see the water in the summer, but there's probably likely water still even in the driest part of the year. You have coniferous and deciduous forests all around them and tall shrubs and thickets, unlike the marshes, which are often void of woody vegetation. So that's the difference. And I hope you can see that. And these guys are actually in the water and they just grow that way. So shallow and open water, they're also known as ponds or slough. They're small bodies of standing water, less than 2 meters deep in the summer, or in the fall too. They're often considered transitions for lakes and marshes, between the lakes and marshes. And they're free of vegetation on the surface. You can see they're along the edge. Once you get to the soily parts, there is, but the surface, there's very little vegetation that actually breaks the surface. There's some down underneath, but not above the surface. So the work that I accomplished while I was out there, I was granted permission by 6 different landowners and a myriad of unknown to me stakeholders on some of the lands. I was granted access to 13 different wetlands. I completed ground truthing of 10 of them. 6 were from this original list and 4 I found when I was out there traipsing around in this allow. And as I discussed before, I manually digitized those waypoints into polygons. So those were satellite images that have recordings of the actual GPS coordinates. So the XY coordinates. So they're actually quite accurate and I can follow them and make nice little lines. And I also developed this ancillary file for all the other information that I collected. Oh, sorry about that. And that's the classification of each one and the pH that I recorded. And this was done in sometimes anywhere from 1 to as many as 6 different areas, depending on the size of the feature. And the temperature recorded at each place. And the importance of all these are for the wetlands classifications, how the Canadian recognizes them and how biologists can recognize them, what kind of species can live there. So that's why these are all very important when you're doing wetlands. And there's many different things that they need in order to determine. So, and then I recorded the area of them all, how many hectares they covered, and the addresses and the actual coordinates. And all the blue ones here are the ones that I completed. And the other ones are the ones that I identified using GIS methods. Actually, I identified several of these, but these ones are not completed yet, the ones that are not blue. So that's why they have no information, but they're ready to go if I continue on or if somebody else wants to continue on. So the knowledge and skills. So I learned all about the Wetland Protection Act and how it differs for the mainland. If they have hectares, if they have wetlands that are 0.2 of a hectare, they're actually protected under the wetlands. Whereas on Vancouver Island, they have to be 0.5. And I didn't quite get an answer as to why there's a difference. Otherwise, maybe there's just more here. So that was just, you know. So connectivity and the importance of wetlands. So how, with the one feature, that large one that I saw, the very first one, the one that intrigued me so much, that one's connected back right through up into just below the border of Quesnel Lake and into Long Lake. It's actually directly connected to Long Lake. Plus there's a pond that's just off the corner of the Yellow Point Park on that private land. That one's all part of that same system. And there's water that goes all the way down from Long Lake, all the way down to the ocean, right through Richard Hill's land. So that's what I learned, how important that is. So if one person does something on their land, it will affect everybody else downstream eventually. The importance of them, well, you've got this wetland here and you've got the beavers that create them. They actually create wetlands, as probably many of you know, but they're like a keystone species for wetlands. And they're quite ingenious little fellows, because I found this half-built lodge and they've used all these bent sticks to go over their entrance routes. This is the way I found it. I was quite amazed at this. And this was something I didn't realize just how smart they are. And they'll create a big lodge out of this one. Why they abandoned the other, I don't know, but it's there. So there's extensive data, like I was talking about. There's so much information that's required by wetland professionals in order to record wetlands. And I learned all about those. And then there was those 5 main wetland classifications. I also learned about infrared false color vegetation index. And that probably goes, okay, what is that? Well, that is this. And this is basically when you go on Google Maps, you'll see an image like this, and you can't really tell what kind of tree it is or whether it's grass or what kind of land it is. Well, there's certain methods through GIS where you can add certain filters and things like that. And it's called the normalized different vegetation index. And you can actually pick out, and through this method using GIS, you can actually tell what types of plants are in each of these types of colors here, or the range. So there's a way to do that. And that's one thing that I learned. And then of course, the aggregating the GPS points, and that's making polygons out of the points and adding them to files. I also learned, I designed this project. I had to do all the background research information. I am not a biologist. I didn't know that much about wetlands starting to this. So I had to begin with that and design this entire project sort of. And then I also had to alleviate some of the landowners' concern about what I was going to be doing or what was going to be happening with this information. And that was good. I was able to talk to them. And working with quite a large group, that was new to me. I had worked in groups in school, and I had worked out in the real world with groups, but never one quite this many people. So, okay. So the deliverables for wetlands include a map, just like this one. So it's got the wetlands, and that's the ones that I actually created, are these green ones. The blue lakes ones are actually from the BC website, from the BC provincial government website. And inflow and outflow are very important as part of the wetlands. So I brought out each of those, each one of these features. So the wetland, the inflow, outflow, and BC lakes are all different types of files, and each one had to be created in the GIS. So that's what these shape files are that include the wetland polygons, your GPS waypoints that we talked about earlier, the inflow and outflow, the study sites, which are here on this map. This is the map that I created to find all the sites. Sorry about that. And these are the properties that I identified And this map had to be created as well. All these properties had to be pulled out of one big file that had all of the properties on them. And each one of these had to be identified, and then the addresses had to be identified. People had to be identified and contacted. And that was the process that I went through for that. So this is also included as part of their deliverables so that the ones that have not been completed can be completed in the future. And then of course, there's the ancillary data file. This isn't actually created in GIS and then transferred, and it is usable as an Excel file. And GIS, all the GIS files are not necessarily usable by the average person. You do have to have the software, which is an Esri software, and it's through the university I have it, but as a normal person, I couldn't afford it. It's $30,000 a year roughly for the licensing for the GIS for what's called ArcGIS Pro, and that's the software that you use. But these can be created as Excel files, which everybody does have access to, so that can be done that way. So the BioBlitz planning that I did as part of this, while I was at each of the wetlands, I took many pictures as discussed. I was always on the lookout for any critters or interesting fauna or uninteresting fauna or invasive fauna or invasive flora, anything like that. So I did see this beautiful girl common garter snake, and I knew it was a female because she was very long and quite large around. So I was excited because I wanted to get a picture of a snake. And then of course, this other one here was at a different wetland, and that's your yellow-bellied sapsucker. And that was quite an investigation because I was actually searching for ducks. I was trying to sneak up on ducks, and then this guy, I heard him on the tree, and I turned around and there he was. So I got his picture. The ducks flew away. I scared them. So through the BioBlitz planning, I created an account for Yes. And while I was out there doing the mapping, I would take these pictures. And in order to create the BioBlitz for Yes, the actual event, you had to make over 50 observations into research grade. That was a requirement in order to be able to be put one of these events on. So over that period of time, I made over 100 observations and got 78 of them to research grade, so that we were able to make it. So I did make a BioBlitz map and poster for the project, working, of course, with meetings with Pamela and Nikki and Jane, and sometimes these guys were regulars, and then there was a few others. Ben was there for one meeting, and Guy was there for a meeting, and different people had joined in at one time or another, but these were the three main people that helped through that. So I also invited my personal friends, and I did invite some iNaturalists through the app itself. One particular one was this Pacific Whitesided dolphin. Amazing person. They've only been doing it for just over a year. And on those 3 days, they did 362 observations. They recorded 129 different species, and they went all the way from the southern point all the way to in Jack Point Park. They had identifications right all across the map. Oh, it was awesome. And that person was also an active identifier to bring them up, bring other people's up to research grades. So that's always good when you have somebody that. And you know what's truly amazing about this person, Pacific White-sided dolphin, is Pamela was kind enough to tell me that this was a boy who was 10 3/4 years old, and he did all this. So this is, if you can say, this is quite a way to be able to do that, to record all those species. You don't have to be a biologist to be able to be involved. You just have to care. That's it. And so I was quite impressed with the Pacific White-sided dolphin, and he's actually a local boy who lives in Ladysmith. So some of the other pictures I took, this one was actually swimming around in the water, so it was probably egg laying time, I'm guessing, or fertilizing time, one of the two, because tree frogs don't generally hang out in the water. They're tree frogs. They just hang out near it usually. And then there's this other type of duck, which I couldn't see. I was trying to get pictures of mallard ducks, but these was another kind, but I didn't get close enough. I'm not sure if it's which type it is, but this one there. And then there's a bald eagle, another important species. And then this is the map that I created for the BioBlitz. So the Pacific white-sided dolphin had some observations from way down here, way all the way up to Jack Point Park. It was just amazing. And I appreciate everybody being involved in that event. You made it such a huge success and way bigger than I ever expected. And I hope to continue on for many years. So I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for joining me here tonight, and to Vancouver Island University and my supervising professor, Dave Cake, at the GIS department at VIU, and my tutor and friend, Orla Osborne, who without her help throughout the year would not have made it even to get to this point. So she was very instrumental in me being able to get here. And also to Yellow Point Ecological Society for giving me the opportunity to do this, and Guy Dauncey for choosing me. And for Pamela Walker and Nikki, you guys were just a pleasure to work with and be around, and I enjoyed talking to you guys all the time. And then the landowners, of course, particularly Richard Hill, Diane Cousins, Bill Olnick, Murray McNabb, and his many stakeholders in the properties there. There's Frank on Long Lake, and that's kind of a funny story because I didn't actually get a hold of him, but I met him while I was doing it, and he promised he wouldn't come out in the buff. So yeah, that was nice of him. And then just recently, Frances Lasser contacted me, and she had missed my email, and she said he said that I could go on their property and map those two. So they're still willing to have me come back and do that. With Murray's place, he offered more areas that I could go and do. So there's definitely more there that I still have, or someone else could be. So, and as Guy said, I always kept in mind that our purpose is to understand, appreciate, protect, and restore these ecosystems and watersheds. And the watersheds are vital and key importance. Without them, nothing can survive. So they're so important to keep as natural as possible and protect them all over Vancouver Island. And we want to inspire and support all the local residents and visitors to do the same. Thank you all very much.
Well, thanks, Carrie.
Have any questions?
Yes, we'll jump in and inundate you with questions. So while people are pondering their questions, if you want to stop sharing, then we can sort of go full on. I noticed that some of the wetlands had a pH of 5.5 and some were up to 7. And I believe that's even a logarithmic scale. So that's a really big difference.
Mm-hmm. It is.
What does that difference, if you want to share your camera as well, what does that difference mean for the plants and the species if they're going from 5.5 up to 7 in the pH?
Well, the 5.5 wouldn't be considered high or extreme acidity level, but it's definitely way more acidic than a 7, right? So you're definitely not going to be getting the same types of plants as in one as you are the other, or the same types of animals as you would in one or the other.
And is it the soil conditions that does that, or what causes such a big difference?
I know that, yeah, it is decomposition of soil. So I know that cedars can create a lot of acidity in the soil and water levels. So it can depend on what the water, the inflow water is coming through. Yeah. So what it goes through as it comes. So, and what minerals and it picks up as it goes.
Interesting to invite some of our participants to share their stories around their wetlands, in particular around the beavers, because the big lake that you were working on that is close to where I live, it was a potato field when the planners mapped it. So it's not the planners' fault. There was a potato field there. But I think Farmer Barney had destroyed the Beavers Dam maybe 30, 40 years ago to turn it into a potato field. Then the beavers came back and reclaimed it.
Yes.
And now there are 2 beaver dams there and we got that big lake. So what are other people's experiences of beavers around Yellow Point and Cedar? Wonder if anyone's got any thoughts on that one.
One point I'd like to make about that potato field beaver lake, or as I like to call Spud Lake, it's only 6.5 feet deep. at the deepest point in the center. I did several measurements around the center to try and find out. And it looks perfectly clean like a lake when you looked across it. That was that one picture where it was just when I was talking about the lakes and how they have no vegetation reaching the surface. And much of the lake is that way, but it's only 6.5 feet deep. So
Sharon Niskak is saying thank you for sharing all your work and the stuff you've done. And Jim is asking, what would you have to say about cattails? He says, we have them in our pond in Harewood. We cleared them out last year, but they'll likely come back and they tend to choke out our pond. Are cattails a positive or a negative influence for wetlands in general?
Well, they're a natural part of wetlands, I can tell you that, but if a person has them, they're not invasive, they're natural, but there's also the fact that they can be kind of obstructive, they can overtake things. So really I don't know enough to know what to do with them.
They are native, I believe. They're not like the broom, which is an invader.
Right. They are native and they do have this tendency to sort of overtake stuff. So
yeah. Jan Dwyer is saying, please convey thanks to you for your wonderful presentation. So there you go. Anyone else have questions or thoughts instead of putting me on the spot to come up with all the questions?
Somebody has a question, Linda, I think, asking about, I don't know if there was one before that. Okay, let's see.
What's a question about the OCP? So Pamela, do you want to unmute yourself and ask about the OCP question, the planning?
Oh, I'm hearing some.
Yes, thank you so much for your incredible presentation, Carrie. I was just wondering, now that you've looked at all of, or some of the wetlands, not all of them in the area, we'll have to have you come back maybe when you have your master's and do some more. But why do you think they're important for us to map and for us to try and protect with our OCP?
Well,
I know you're not a wetlands.
I am not an expert by any means, but I do know enough to know that wetlands do a lot of filtering of different types of toxins and things that can go through the soil. So they're important. They catch those. So they do keep your drinking water cleaner by having wetlands and protecting those wetlands and keeping them as wetlands. It's vital. So it's also important in the OCP so that the properties that do have those wetlands, even the one I mapped was 0.01, the one with the tree frogs swimming in it was only 0.01, but it was connected to another one and connected to another one, and all the areas in between are important. So it's not just one wetland, it's the whole system. It's all interconnected, and you have to make sure that you don't disrupt that system or bad things happen. And when you
And I have another question. I don't want to put Ben Martman on the spot, but I'm wondering, Ben, do you know whether there's any protection for our wetlands that we have now, that we know of now in the OCP?
You are putting me on the spot, I hope, but I don't think there's much wording in our OCP. I know that there are in other areas, and they're trying to put those in place, but we're also trying to harmonize at the same time. So, but one of the things that I know another area is working on was that wetlands, will take up a certain portion of your property. And if you wanted to subdivide, should that wetland count as the property that's going to be, like if you've got 10 acres and you have allowed to have 2 5-acre parcels and 2 acres are wetland, should you be allowed to divide if you've only got 8 acres of non-wetland? So there's those kind of questions that would be great for the community to weigh in on in the OCPs. And it's not just about 5-10 acres. It's about do you include wetlands as part of the total property when you go to rezone or subdivide? And so I think that's a really good question to ask. And I'll try to capture it here for the staff at the CVRD.
Cool. So Dave Haley has a question. Can you unmute yourself, Dave? I muted you because you had background noise.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Carrie, for the presentation. We've got two questions, I guess, or question and a comment. Do any of those wetlands connect into the salt water?
The one that goes from like it, there's definitely from Long Lake that goes down there through the potato farm and the beaver dams and all that, and then goes across the road into that pond onto Richard Hills, onto Yellow Point Lodge, and then goes down through a whole mess of wetlands and continues on and then empties into the ocean.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was just wondering about potential for SEM-audit enhancement.
Yeah.
And then secondly, one of the values of these wetlands would be for water source for fire protection. And the fire department might be quite interested in your mapping. Seeing as none of Yellow Point has hydrants or so
like a pumper truck and being able to access it through the truck.
Pumper truck, or perhaps even establish what they call dry hydrants so they can sort of hook up the truck quickly. Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
So I think with the wetlands, say the one just behind Yellow Point Road, off Barney Road, it certainly goes down to the ocean, but there are two beaver dams. So any salmon coming up would not get through. And if they did get through, the bottom of that, as Carrie said, is kind of it's not deep, it's sludgy. It's not the lovely calm river bottom that the salmon want.
Yeah.
So I believe it has leeches in it if you want to come do some leech fishing, but I don't think it has any fish in it. The ducks the ducks like it.
Yep.
But I don't know how the leeches got there from when it was a potato field. How do leeches travel? I haven't a clue.
Maybe on a duck.
Maybe on the back of a duck. It's all these things are possible.
From one to another. So
yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Or just share your experiences of things. Murray, you've been living with your wetlands for many years. Tell us some stories. You're muted. You unmute and then you can share. Hang on, Murray, you're still muted. There's a button there somewhere. We all learn by these. There you go. Yeah.
there we go.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, that's fine.
Hello,
Yes.
Murray.
Sorry, I can't see you, so
We can see you now.
yeah, well, the wetlands have been there since the start of time, and I guess all wetlands are slowly filling in and would become bogs, I guess, given enough time. And unfortunately, all the fields that are fields now with good black soil, those were all marshes and wetlands at one time. So in some respects, just like the one down off of Yellow Point Road, there's a big panic about growing food locally. Should those beaver dams be blasted out of there and that turned into a potato field to grow 60 tons of potatoes?
Yeah, that field to the right of your land, which floods in the winter, and then you drain it and you grow on it. Was that fully flooded and still you started farming it, or has it always been a bit of both, winter, summer?
Yeah, I think the one that's towards Michael Lake.
No, it's the other side of your property. If you're looking to your property from the north, from the south, on the right-hand side of the farm is a big field which always floods, and then you grow corn in it, I believe.
Yeah, well, I guess I mean, as long as I know, it's been like that, flooded and then it dries out in the summertime. But
Yeah.
there's no way, it's sort of like a bathtub, that one field, and it's just a matter of everything evaporating out of it to dry up.
And is your soil particularly good there because it has been a wetland for maybe, ever since the Ice Age before that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason those wetlands and peat soil is there is from all the vegetation rotting down, and all of that land around Michael Lake that had been used at one time for growing potatoes, that's all peat soil that's come from vegetation.
Yeah. And I mean, this is a controversial issue because some people keep the beaver dams and some people feel if they don't destroy the beaver dams every year, they can't farm. So there's a...
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, just that these marshlands are very nice and there's a lot of ecological value to them, but I imagine there'd be an uproar if somebody said, we need to get rid of those beaver dams on that swamp beside Barney Road and grow potatoes.
But there are some landowners who I believe quietly, constantly either reduce the beaver dam or cut it back a bit to reclaim the land.
Yeah, but I mean, there's lots of land for farming, it's just not used.
Yeah, yeah. Any other?
I'm going to just jump in here. When we had bought our farm, Yellow Point Blues, and it was the old Schofield farm. So they grew lots of potatoes there, and there was lots of people that came by and said, oh, when they were kids, they helped to bring in the potatoes. But we took that peat soil and we moved it, and we made some more land for our blueberries. The peat soil wasn't all that good. It doesn't have all that many nutrients in it. We had to augment it quite a bit, but it wasn't until I retired that I thought, gee whiz, maybe that was an environmental disaster that we created, because that, well, it was 1 acre of 35, but that is no longer dry, no longer wet. And that peat, once it dries out, that's it. You're done. It'll never be able to hold water again.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyone else got thoughts they want to share, or stories from the 30, 40, 50 years you live around here?
Linda Stevens typed in a question into the thing, and I'd just like to answer her.
Yes, go ahead.
She asked if any of the wetlands have public access, or are they all on private land? They all border private land. Most of them are completely on private land. The only one that has some access to it is that potato field there. That's the only one.
Well, that's private land too. The access to that is private land. It's either,
yeah, and that's access. Yes. That was,
it's either Janet and Darren or Richard who are basically own the whole thing. They let people through as neighbors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're pretty much all on private land.
There is a wetland, isn't there? There's a wetland in Yellow Point Park that you didn't get to, right, Carrie?
I didn't map the ones in the park because a study has been done on the park before.
Okay, but that's certainly accessible.
Yeah, that one's accessible, but the ones I did were all on private land. So no, I had to get permission from the landowners.
Yeah, the trail in Yellow Point Park, where it goes down across Horse Crossing and then back up again by Fern Crossing, it crosses the wetlands both occasions, and there's lots of skunk cabbages down there. But the trails don't explore into the wetlands. Certainly, you wouldn't want to, probably. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, Guy, there is a story that was shared with me, and I'll share it, but I don't know if I'll do it justice.
Okay.
And it goes back, it's a story that was passed on through the elders of the First Nations in this area. And it was documented in the archive down at UVic. And that's how it was passed on to me, through that archive. And basically it gave a story of how they would come up to close to Michael Lake to find, the natives would come up close to Michael Lake to find some of the cedar trees that they would want to use to carve, I think actually to make canoes, or I'm not sure if it's totem poles or house lodges poles, but and that they would come up here, and it was quite a journey from, imagine, Michael Lake down to the ocean, and that they would have a tradition of 50 people coming up, and and just chanting and singing as they would drop this tree and then move it down to the ocean. And some kids were coming back up after they had done this with one tree, and they could hear this hum, 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 the sort of the chanting going on, and they knew it wasn't them. And so they looked through the trees, and there were the beaver people doing the same thing with their trees and moving their stuff. So the beaver people were actually copying the natives, and that's sort of a story that was passed on through the years and generations.
That's great. It is mind-boggling to realize that we white settlers have been on the land since the maximum 1840s, 1850s, 150 years or so, and there's 5,000 years during which the Snuneymuxw and the Shuminas people knew every nook and cranny, every wetland, every lake, where the best trees were. I mean, 5,000 years of continuous existence is some incredible thing, really. And there's probably so many more stories like that that we really should be all learning and appreciating.
And I would probably suggest the beavers are thinking the same thing.
Well, they were probably here long before that. They would have come in, you know, soon after the ice age, when the ice melted 12,000 years ago. They might have been here a very, very long time. Yeah. And of course, they would have come from the south. They'd have migrated up here, I presume, right?
Yeah, and there was the village in Haida Gwaii that was 14,000 dated, 14,000.
So, but interestingly, the beavers, when because we were covered in 2 kilometers of ice everywhere, and then the ice went down. There must have been a land bridge at some point for the beavers and the deer and the bears and the cougars and the wolves all to return to the island, unless they're all swam across the water, which is possible as well, right? Beavers are good swimmers, so maybe they all swam here. Any final thoughts? Philosophical, historical, geological, botanical, wetlandical? I'm sure there's a Latin name for that. Don't be shy, you folks. So look, let's thank Carrie for the beavering away you've done, getting into the wetlands and contributing so much. And we know you're going to be around here for quite a long time. We need you. We want to keep you around here. So is there one new message coming in? That there's a question here that just says, yeah, from Pamela, to thank you so much for all your work. Carrie, she says, you're a wonder. So there we go.
Thank you, Pamela.
So we'll call it a day. Thanks, everyone. Well, this will be recording on our website soon for everyone else. And enjoy the rest of the evening. And we'll let you know when we have our next event coming up soon.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Carrie. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you all for coming.
Pleasure.